In our last topic, we saw that one of our goals as Christians should be to help our physical and spiritual children learn to become more like Christ. We saw that we help our physical and spiritual children become more like Christ as they learn to think and act biblically, instead of continuing to remain conformed to the world. However, learning to become more like Christ will often cause the world around us to react to us. We will see that as we learn why the world hates. Our focus in this topic will be how to help our physical and spiritual children learn to recognize and accept the hatred of the world. In John 8:44, Christ told the Jewish leaders, "You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do." He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. In this verse, we see three key characteristics of Satan. First, we see that he was a murderer from the beginning. Second, he does not stand in the truth. And third, he is a liar and the father of lies. Christ told the Jewish religious leaders that they were like their father, and so they did what Satan did. In the same way, we need our physical and spiritual children to understand the character of Satan and help them realize that those who follow Satan will show the characteristics of Satan. That's why 1 John 3 verse 10 tells us, "In this the children of God and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is he who does not love his brother." The person following Satan cannot show the love of Christ in his or her life. In contrast, 1 John 3 verse 11 says, "For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another." Here we see that one of the characteristics of a person who is following Christ is showing the love of Christ to others. However, we realize that we cannot show that love in our own strength. When we depend on our own strength, we will act out of fear. And that is why most new Christians are still acting out of fear most of the time. In 1 John 4 verse 18, it says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love." However, as we grow and mature in Christ, his love is being brought to maturity in our lives. As a result, we are no longer driven by the fear of man. Instead, we're learning to be led by the love of Christ. It is that love that Christ showed to his disciples and to us, and commanded us to show to others. The world cannot understand the love of Christ. First, they cannot understand the love of Christ because their father is filled with hate. This was shown clear back with the first children in the world. Cain was very religious. We see that he even brought an offering to the Lord. Cain was a gardener and brought some of the fruit of his crops to the Lord. And here we see that he was depending on his own efforts to try and please God. Even though he brought an offering to the Lord, his heart was controlled by sin. He was following his father, the devil. This is explained so well for us in 1 John 3 verse 12, where we read, "Not as Cain, who was of the wicked one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil and his brothers righteous. Cain could not love as Christ loved because he was following his father, the devil. And second, they cannot understand the love of Christ because their father does not stand in truth. Earlier in John 8 verse 32, Christ had told the people gathered around him, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." The Jews immediately replied in John 8 verse 33, they answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants, and we have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free?" Here we see that the Jews thought they were free and had never been in bondage to anyone. However, Hebrews 2:14 through 15 tells us to whom they were in bondage. Those verses say, "Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who, through fear of death, were all their lifetime subject to bondage." Here we see that all the people who are not Christians are in bondage to the devil, and he controls their lives by fear. Christ explained the only way a person can be set free from that bondage in John 8 verse 36, where he says, "Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed." Only Christ can set people free from the bondage of sin and the fear of death. That's why we want to help our physical and spiritual children understand that Christ has given them liberty and set them free from that bondage. Galatians 5 verse 1 says, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage." The book of Galatians clearly shows us that those who try to live their lives as Christians by keeping the law have placed themselves under a new form of bondage. That's why Galatians 5 verse 13 tells us, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." As Christians, we've been set free from the bondage of fear so that we are free to serve one another in love. And third, they cannot understand the love of Christ because their father is a liar and the father of lies. In the previous paragraph, we saw one of the examples of the fact that the devil is a liar. He leads false teachers to lie to Christians and try to get them to try to grow in their spiritual lives by keeping the law. Ephesians 4 verse 14 tells us that immature Christians are easily deceived by such false teachers. That verse says that they should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men, in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. Here we see that Satan uses lies to try and cause Christians to remain as spiritual toddlers. In 1 Corinthians 3, 1 through 3 and verse 11, here in Ephesians 4 verse 14, and in Hebrews 5, 11 through 14, we see 10 characteristics of spiritual toddlers who have been deceived by the lies of the devil. However, with people who are not Christians, Satan controls their lives with the 3 characteristics of Satan mentioned above. As a result, we see that it is of the heart of those who do not know Christ to hate Christ. Christ told the disciples in John 15, 18 through 19, "If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." This is why it's essential to help new Christians understand that there will be people who will oppose them. They're just following their father, the devil. And we need to help our physical and spiritual children learn to follow the example of Christ and not take that hatred personally, because the world will hate us when they hate Christ. It was for this reason that Christ prepared the disciples to expect opposition and hatred. However, he also prepared them to respond to that hatred with love. In Matthew 5, verse 43, Christ reminded people what the world taught. That verse says, "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.'" Christ said that those who choose to follow him are to respond in a very different way. Matthew 5, verse 44 says, "But I say to you, love your enemies and bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you." Here we see that as we learn to be led by the love of Christ, we'll respond in 4 ways to those who hate us because they were controlled by the devil. We will love our enemies. We will bless those who curse us. We will do good to those who hate us, and we will pray for those who spitefully use us and persecute us. Peter also taught us how to respond when people hate us and do evil to us. 1 Peter 2, 20 through 24 says, "For what credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who when he was reviled did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously, who himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sins, might live for righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed." In these verses, we see that Peter encourages us to follow the example of Christ when we suffer for him because of the hatred of the world towards Christ. We also want to help our children learn to follow the example of Christ when those who hate them make them suffer for Christ. After talking about Cain in 1 John 3:13 through 15, John said, "Do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. Whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him." In these verses, John points out the fact that we should not be surprised when the world hates us. We want our children to realize that the reason the world hates us is due to the fact that they're following their father, the devil. In contrast, we want to give our physical and spiritual children an example through our own lives of how to follow the new commandment of Christ. In John 13:34 through 35, we read, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And by this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." We want to show our children how to enjoy the liberty Christ has given them by learning to serve one another in love. Galatians 5:16 through 25 says that this will happen as they show them how to walk in the Spirit, be led by the Spirit, and learn to live in the Spirit. Then their lives will bear the fruit of the Spirit. May the Lord richly bless you as you show your physical and spiritual children how to respond to the hatred of the world with the love of Christ.